Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. I've just read and reread Punisher The Platoon, number one and number two, because I'm thinking about a couple scenes from it and whether these are moments of completely unsubtle SJW politics or whether they're justified in the context of the story. So I don't really want to talk about comics that a lot of the bigger channels have talked about because I don't want to be redundant, but I've listened to several of the big channels' reviews on this, and some of them have touched on this point, but they haven't really expressed quite the point I'm thinking about. So I do think this can be a fresh video. To review, I first looked at Punisher the Platoon number one, and I didn't really see anything in it that was video worthy. I thought it was adequate art, but not great art. I thought it was everyone seemed to think it was kind of a dull story. I saw it as building, and the payoff came in issue two. So I see it as a decent comic, which looks great by comparison to a lot of the trash I've been reading. But the political moment comes in the first couple pages of issue one, where the author, what's his name, is talking about this idea of America once being innocent, and then after Vietnam we were no longer an innocent country. And then one of the soldiers says, one thing I never understand is this idea people like you have about America being innocent. When were we innocent? And he goes on to talk about killing Native Americans and mistreatment of Polynesians. So this is the moment that two of the major channels talked about as being kind of a awkward little political moment, America was never great moment in this book. And I had that immediate thought too the first time I read it on my own. And I forgave it because there's a sense in which you can read it in context as making sense. The author has kind of a naive, progressive view of the world. The narrative that America was innocent and sweet, and then Vietnam came and we were all bad. And then in context, it kind of makes sense for the soldier to correct him. But I think the reason the moment reads is so awkward is just in my own personal experience. I've had several friends who were veterans, relatives who were veterans, and that's generally speaking, veterans aren't the type of people to bring up the slaughter of Native Americans or the mistreatment of Polynesians in casual conversation. The type of people who bring that up in casual conversation are college students and New York liberals. So I sensed that as a scene where the author's politics was coming into the comic, but I wasn't so annoyed that I'd throw away the comic or throw up my hands and say, enough of this SJW trash. I forgave it because it at least somewhat made sense in the context of that story. And then I saw something in issue two, which I just found egregious. And because of that, that's now colored my view of issue one. So now I'm thinking, issue two is so bad that I'm now thinking, should I keep reading it? Because I still enjoy the action. I still think it's decent art, dynamic. I agree with Zach that I don't have any war experiences, but man, it's kind of a gut punch seeing the machine guns and the details. But one of the reasons this scene in issue two is egregious is because the author Ennis has clearly done research on Vietnam, and it feels like if he's done, he should know some things that I think he's missing, and he's not including in the Punisher 2. So I need to read it so we can understand what I'm talking about. So the author then shows his phone, not the author of the comic book. What's the name? Michael Goodwin. Michael Goodwin is the name of the fictitious character in the Punisher story who's writing a book on the Punisher. So he shows the soldiers his phone, and he shows them the North Vietnamese not a general, I think, but Officer Giap. And he starts talking about his relationship with Giap and talking with Giap. He praises him as an intelligent man, kind of a gentle man, and then the author goes on to say, yes, actually, he likes America, and he's referring to the North Vietnamese general here. Likes Americans. He's been here quite a bit. So this, I can tell, is sort of meant to help me identify with this Vietnamese character, to kind of be inclined to like him. When someone says of a character like that, oh yes, he loves Americans, well then I kind of say, oh okay, he seems like a cool guy. Now the problem is though, we're talking about a Vietnamese communist soldier, so that's the important point. Now let's continue. So Then GAP says, if you are American, you will understand the notion of love of country, of fighting to defend one's home, of the determination that your nation should be free, as you understand that concept. So it was for us in our little stretch of what you call Southeast Asia. Here's the deal. It's even mentioned in a moment that GAP lives in Saigon, and the second I heard that, the thought that immediately came to my mind is, well, okay, this guy is such a nice, gentle little old man. He loves Americans so much. Was he involved in the fall of Saigon? Was this nice little guy I'm supposed to identify with, was he involved in the slaughter of 3 million people after the fall of Saigon? And the question that arose to me is, how is it that you can write a comic book about Vietnam and the Punisher, and you can mention in casual conversation the treatment of Native Americans in America and the treatment of Polynesians by America? That's apparently relevant to your Vietnam Punisher story, but the fall of Saigon isn't relevant to your Vietnam Punisher story. Not one of the there are 4 soldier characters who are being interviewed about their relationship with the Punisher. Not one of them objects essentially to them being compared to a North Vietnamese general. And then it goes on, it even gets worse. So then the author says, which is not to say there isn't anger toward Americans in Vietnamese society. They still lose a few people every year to unexploded bombs and some of the birth defects in kids whose parents or grandparents were exposed to defoliants. I could show you the pictures, but they'd turn your stomach. Well, this is disgusting. All right? Oh, you're going to show me pictures that'll turn my stomach. Well, what about the pictures of the 3 million people killed by Chinese troops? Are those pictures not going to turn my stomach? This is pathetic. Don't give me this nice little decent smiley picture of a communist soldier. Essentially say that just like Americans, he has so much love for his country and patriotism, and isn't he just like us? I mean, sure we did horrible things, but isn't it so nice that the Vietnamese can forgive us after? Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. So what's the fall of Saigon? I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on the war in Vietnam. I haven't so much as read a book on the war of Vietnam. All I know about it is just conversations I've had with friends and relatives who served. I've read some kind of generic little articles, kind of in high school when they'd ask you to write an essay about these topics. I'd go read kind of a conservative view on the war and a liberal view on the war. But even just by reading a few articles and watching a few History Channel documentaries, I know what the fall of Saigon was. I know that 3 million people died under the communist regime after Vietnam. That's half of the innocent people that Hitler killed. All right, that's half a Holocaust. We said never again after World War II, but then we gave peace a chance in Vietnam, and 3 million people died. So, dang it, I don't want to talk about Vietnam because my point is bigger than what your politics are on Vietnam. I don't know what to think about Vietnam because I'm not educated enough to have an informed opinion about it. I have just some general thoughts. I'm kind of a libertarian at heart, so I don't think you should have the draft, but I'm not qualified to make any kind of comment on whether the war in Vietnam was justified. But I know garbage propaganda when I see it. And when an author is clearly educated himself on the war in Vietnam to know the names of places and key battles, this is something that should have come up immediately. And I think the writing point that I'm trying to make, the point I'm trying to get at is this SJW Marvel, is this an egregious instance of politics intruding itself into comics to make it political propaganda, or is it appropriate? Is it maybe kind of progressive but subtle messaging? And my conclusion is this is egregious. It's not subtle at all. It's kind of pathetic. This has been a undertone to Comicsgate discussions, and one of the counterpoints that the left and anti-Comicsgate individuals, critics of Comicsgate, have tried to make is they'll say comics were always political, politics were always about social justice, Captain America was a social justice warrior, there have been criticisms of Nixon and right-wing politics, and once again there is a limited truth to the point until you think about the point they're trying to make a little bit more carefully. When people say they don't want politics in their comics, they mean that they want good stories where they don't feel like they're being attacked, where they don't feel like the author is pointing a finger at them and saying, you horrible, disgusting people. I do not want to read a Punisher story about Vietnam where I'm being told that I'm just like a communist Vietnamese officer, and isn't he just so nice to forgive me? And that also then goes on to ignore something like the fall of Saigon. That's why I'm saying this is egregious. So let me think of an example of a political comic from years ago when I was reading Spider-Man, because like I said, when I was 13, I was so lucky to get a digital edition of the entire run of The Amazing Spider-Man up to the 90s, and I binge read tons of them. I don't remember the issue, but I think it was an issue shortly before Captain Stacy died, Gwen Stacy's dad. There was some mayor who was a friend of Gwen Stacy's, and he was supposed to be sort of a law and order Republican conservative. And he made the comment to Captain Stacy that he was kind of liberal for his tastes. And then this mayor started taking over New York, and he was saying law and order, and rounding up people and violating constitutional rights. And I can remember thinking, as a 13-year-old boy, I understood that this was a political morality story. And I kind of understood that people like me and like my family, conservative types, were the target for criticism in the story. Yet I forgave it. It didn't irritate me or make me hate the author because it made sense in context. The problem with the villainous mayor character wasn't that he was a conservative. The problem with the villainous mayor character was that he was rounding people up and violating constitutional rights. So within the context of the story, you can understand that the point isn't all Republicans, all conservatives, all people who think we need law and order, they're all bad. You would understand from the context of the story that rounding people up and locking them in jail without a trial, that's what's bad. That's something that Marvel knew in the 60s and the 70s that they apparently need to know now when writing stories for Miss Marvel and Captain Marvel. Okay, that's another video. So yes, the left makes a correct point that politics and political messages have been present in Marvel comics for decades, but they're missing the degree of politics in Marvel comics and the tone of the point in the Marvel comics. So the reason reading The Punisher, The Platoon #2 was important for me was not just that I then noticed two little political messages in a row. It was the nature of the political message. The nature of the political message in Punisher, The Platoon #2 that I find egregious is the creating a moral equivalency between communist North Vietnamese troops who slaughtered 3 million innocent people after the fall of Saigon with America in general and American soldiers and the American military-industrial complex. I do not think that's a moral equivalency. We didn't round up and slaughter 3 million people after the fall of Saigon, after we gave peace a chance, So, dang it. I think I'm still going to read Punisher The Platoon, but that for me, I thought about it for a week before making this video because I wanted to be sure that wasn't just my gut talking. And my conclusion is that Ennis, if you're going to try to preach to us about the morality of war and the meaning of Vietnam, at the very least, don't hide the war crimes and the murder and the toll on innocent life that the communist army engaged in. I think this is the one principle that could help SJW Marvel help itself. I could read a SJW story that's making a left-wing or a liberal or a progressive point, so long as I felt that the other side was represented fairly, which is a good thing I think Sean Gordon Murphy seems to be doing in Batman White Knight so far. It's allowing the right-wing perspective to be voiced. And second, I don't want to see I don't want to see you missing really obvious things in making a political point. So not mentioning the actions of the Communist Army is the really obvious thing Ennis has missed mentioning, which then makes the America was never great moment in issue 1 look worse the second time I read it. Because now it's trying to lecture me and moralize, and it's missing incredibly obvious historical details that any sane person would have mentioned almost immediately in that conversation. And but that would assume that the writer cares about the fall of Saigon or cares about providing that kind of moral complexity, because the fall of Saigon and the death of 3 million people because we left Vietnam, that's not something that lends itself to progressive morality plays about the evils of America and how America needs to get out of all these nations. I don't even know what to think, right? I'm a kid. I'm like a young person. Like everybody else in America, I'm kind of torn on the question of whether we should intervene in other nations or generally leave other nations alone. But this kind of political messaging just makes me sick and makes me irritated at the author for having the audacity to virtue signal to me. So, I don't know. By the way, this is just kind of a channel note. I still haven't found my phone. And I want to have my phone for when I do really cringy comics so that I can respond and react. I love that. So some people seem to be worried that I was going to give up doing the phone and doing videos forever. And don't worry, video cringy Marmaduke fans coming back. All I want to do is just make sure I have good audio to go with the video so that so that you can actually hear it and not have the audio dipping in and out. While I'm looking for my phone, I'm just going to try to do a few videos where I don't really need to look through a whole comic book, or where the point of the video isn't me reacting to it, but where I have a tighter focus or just a single point to make. I'm number one, Burp Squad, not Cough Squad, not Sniffle Squad. Now it's Burp Squad. I'm number one Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Catch you later.